The winds of change continue to blow out at the Star in Frisco. Let's talk NFL free agency next here on Noise from the Boys. Welcome to Noise from the Boys, where we talk all things Dallas Cowboys and some broader topics relating to the game of football and the NFL as well. I'm Bobby Belt, Dallas Cowboys insider for 105.3 The Fan in Dallas. That is your radio flagship home of the Dallas Cowboys. Pleased you could join us today, where we're going to talk a little bit about NFL free agency. It has been a tumultuous couple of months here for the Dallas Cowboys, from the poor end of the season, which was a rough season to begin with, all the way through the will they, won't they standoff with Mike McCarthy and the Joneses as they determine what they were going to do with their head coaching spot, only to mutually agree to part ways, leading to the opening for Brian Schottenheimer to be hired as the 10th head coach in the history of the Dallas Cowboys. And it was a move, obviously, you guys were all there, that was greeted with a lot of skepticism would be the kindest way to say it. The most blunt way to put it was probably anger and just outright disgust from a lot of the fan base. But I feel like since that time, since late January, whenever that was the exact date of that occurred, I feel like the fan base has slowly come around to the idea of like, okay, maybe Brian Schottenheimer could be okay. And maybe we like some of the hires that he's made, and we like some of the things that he's saying. Now, that'll all go out the window if they start 0-4. But for now, people are feeling a little more optimistic, I feel like, about Brian Schottenheimer and some of the different changes that he's made along the way already. And those sort of changes are now leading into another period of change, which we're going to talk about today, which is NFL free agency. Beginning on Monday at noon Eastern, you get the legal tampering period for NFL free agency, which I know the league hates that term. They don't like calling it legal tampering or tampering period or anything else. They call it, I think the technical term is the negotiating window. That's the term that they much prefer. And that begins, though, that period where teams are allowed to basically have discussions for the next 52 hours, I believe it is, from Monday at noon Eastern up till I believe it's 4 o'clock on Wednesday, where they're able to sit there and have discussions and negotiate with players and get deals in place before actually being able to make them official on Wednesday. So there's obviously a lot of questions about how active the Cowboys will be. Every offseason, it feels like we get into this point where we're optimistic and thinking, I'm ready to be hurt again. I see all this money that they have available, that they've freed up. That can't be for nothing. That's got to be going towards free agents, right? In some instances, yeah, but probably not the free agents that you think. This is not going to be an instance where they're just right at the top of the market trying to sign Milton Williams or, making a big play for T. Higgins or anything like that. They're going to play more in the middle tier. They're going to look for a good bargain. That's what they've always done. A lot of times it has not worked out for them. Occasionally they've hit on some. J-Ron Kearse comes to mind. Carl Lawson was a good player for them last year. It took till August to get him, but they've had some successes with it before. It's not a strategy that Cowboys fans obviously enjoy or prefer. They would like them to spend more like the days of go get Dion or go get Rocket Ishmael or Joey Galloway or, I know nobody ended up liking this deal, but where's the guy who went out and signed Brandon Carr for 5 years and $50 million? And so this is always a painful time, it feels like, for Cowboys fans, as they have some level of optimism. I feel like every year, no matter what they say, they feel optimistic that maybe this is the year something will get done. But we're not going to talk about that specifically today. The idea of what they will do outside their building, because before they can even address what gets done outside their building, they need to address what they have and what contracts they have that have expired. They've already gotten a jump start on a lot of it, as we've seen. They got Osa Odigizua done, who was their top primary target. He was their big priority of in-house players that were expiring. And so they got that one done and got it done at a deal. It's a legitimate deal relative to what the market was willing to pay Osa Odigizua. He ends up signing for 4 years, $80 million, which is $5 million below the tag, and is probably $7 million below annually what the market would have been willing to pay him. I think if Oso Odigizua hits the open market and he's willing to just say, I'm going for all the money I can, he's getting something closer to, in all likelihood, as nuts as some people may think this sounds because of, the stats. If you just look at the stat sheet and see what he produces, he was probably getting something close to Christian Wilkins. And so I think $28 million was potentially on the table. He wanted to be here in Dallas. Cowboys were willing to play ball. It was a perfect coming together of two sides that wanted to get something done and were willing to get a little bit outside their comfort zone in the process. I still think that's more than the Cowboys wanted to pay. And I think it's way less than Osa would have wanted to take necessarily on the open market and what he could have gotten. So that deal has worked out. That's a check in their favor so far. They get CJ Goodwin done. They've gotten some of the exclusive rights free agents done, like Wanye Thomas and Brock Hoffman. They've already tendered Kevontae Turpin, so they've got a hold placed on him. But they still have a number of free agents that are left that they need to make decisions on before things get too deep and before other teams come around and start feeling some things out. So basically what we're going to go over today is I'm going to go over the list of unrestricted free agents, restricted free agents, and exclusive rights free agents. There's so rarely movement there that it's really not even worth diving into too deeply. But I've got their list of unrestricted free agents that they have remaining, and we're just going to kind of go over what I expect, what I've heard, and where I think things are heading on that front. So the first name that's on this list is Brandin Cooks, the wide receiver who has been here for the last couple of years. Probably a disappointment. And I don't think it's anything necessarily of his doing. Him being banged up last year and some of the issue he had with the knee, where he had gotten some treatment outside of the facility. That maybe is something that he holds responsibility for, but I think in a lot of ways he just was not used in a way that you would expect a team to use Brandin Cooks. This is a guy who is supposed to be a vertical threat and a guy who every training camp we would watch him torch the defensive backs with his speed. And then we would get into the regular season and it wouldn't be used like that. He's running slants and stop routes and the classic slant flats combo that the McCarthy West Coast offense likes. So I don't think it ever utilized his skill set the right way. He's obviously not the player he once was, but I think he still could have done more for them here if they would have just been willing to let him play within his comfort zone a little bit. In fact, right before we started recording this, I saw Josina Anderson had tweeted a quote from Brandin Cooks, and I'll throw it up on the screen here, but I'll read it. She said she just spoken to him on the phone, and this is what Brandin Cooks had to say about the Cowboys. He said, "I'm expecting a good free agency. This is the first time that I would be a free agent in my career, but I'm also open to returning to Dallas. At the end of the day, I'm just trying to win. I am fully healthy and have nothing to hide." She mentions that Cooks missed 7 games midseason last year with a knee injury before returning. On the probability of returning to Dallas, he says, quote, "I have a good relationship with Dak, the Jones family, and CD. It's just one of those things where they have to focus on what they have to get done first too. I would love to play with the Cowboys. At the same time, they would have to use me right. I don't think they fully used me to my strengths." It's a little direct. It's a little blunt from Brandin Cooks there, but I don't think it's wrong. And I think he's just being upfront and honest with you. I think he would like to come back to Dallas. There's a scenario where he would like that. And I think he does have a good relationship with Dak. And I think Dak really likes Brandin Cooks. But like he mentions there, they've got things they got to get done first too, which means they're clearly not considering him to be a priority for them here in Dallas. He's an afterthought at this point, and there's going to have to be, it's going to have to work for both sides probably after they've explored other options a little bit. But he also mentions there how they just didn't use him to his strengths. And I think that's 100% correct. I don't think he's off base on that at all. And so I think Brandin Cooks is in all likelihood out. So we're going to go ahead and issue a ruling on that one that says Brandin Cooks is not returning in 2025. Next up on this list is DeMarcus Lawrence, who we just saw his draft classmate, Zach Martin, retire last week. Time flies. It seems like just yesterday, everybody was fighting for Johnny Manziel or one of Johnny Manziel here, or the love affair they seem to have for Ryan Shazier. Zach Martin turned out pretty decent, and But it goes by very quickly, and he just was not the same player anymore. I think everybody kind of anticipated, and Zach Martin made reference to it, everybody anticipated that he was going to make this decision ultimately. But DeMarcus Lawrence was the second round pick in that draft, a guy they traded up to go get, and a guy who, the first couple of years was considered maybe a little bit of a disappointment, an underperformer. And then he broke out in a big way in 2017, had a big year in 2018, got the big deal after the big time standoff from the back-to-back tag years. But this is one where I think we're probably saying goodbye to another long tenured veteran and a guy who, when he can stay healthy, which he was not healthy last year, he was banged up. But when he can stay healthy, DeMarcus Lawrence is still a very good player and somebody who I think can be a full-time starter in this league. It's just a matter of keeping himself, healthy enough for 17 games or even 14 to 15. But still a top tier run defender and a guy who is a solid pass rusher and somebody who's very disruptive. He doesn't always finish things off. He doesn't, finish the sack. A lot of times it is just generating pressure though, and forcing bad throws and forcing poor decisions that have resulted in turnovers or other things like that. But a really good player still, one who I think everybody probably agrees though it's time for something new. Sort of like where they got with Tyron Smith last year, where it was everybody probably realized, hey, this is getting near the end. I still want to play football. We view each other probably a little differently and view these things a little bit differently. And it's probably best if we just go explore other opportunities. And so I think that's what's ultimately is going to happen with DeMarcus Lawrence. Next on this list, Trey Lance. So Stephen Jones had talked about Trey Lance a couple weeks ago, and that was when he made the headline grabbing news or quote to David Moore of the Dallas Morning News, where he had said that he anticipated they would probably get a quarterback in the draft. It was not meant to be Shedeur Sanders or some blinking light or anything like that. This is more about finding a value guy, drafting like the way they used to draft Mike White or Ben DiNucci. Like that's the kind of pick I think that they're talking about here. But in the course of those comments, he mentioned that Trey Lance was going to be looking for other opportunities. And, that was something where they made the trade and Trey's probably looking for a starting job at this point. Or an opportunity to potentially one day be a starter. And that was kind of thrown out the window when the Cowboys signed Dak Prescott. But I thought those were actually, there was a couple of interesting things about those comments. One, Stephen Jones finally acknowledged that Trey Lance was insurance against Dak Prescott not signing here. Or potentially, and not anything I think he would say, but is a reality. They were hoping that would be some sort of pressure point that they could apply and say, all right, he's got so much leverage in these negotiations. We at least got to have somebody with a big time pedigree or someone who was at one point considered a massive talent, and at least have that as like, look, we're not completely helpless if you just walk away. That was never going to be an effective sell though. And I think Dak and his agent Todd France saw right through that, but Cowboys had to make some sort of play there as best they could. So I thought that was interesting, but the other aspect of this that's interesting and has not gotten talked about very much was the Cowboys were interested in bringing Trey Lance back late in the season. And they had even broached the topic. I don't believe figures were exchanged or anything else, but they had broached the topic of an extension here in Dallas for Trey Lance and bringing him back next year. And it was my understanding that I believe this was early December when this occurred, that Trey Lance and his representatives declined to get into those negotiations or into those discussions and wanted to go ahead and just look for other opportunities. So Dallas was willing to continue this partnership or this marriage a little bit longer and have him continue as the backup quarterback here. And ultimately Trey Lance decided that that's not something that he wanted to do. And so Trey Lance, another one, these first three that we've talked about, all of them, I think, are out. Next up on this list is Brian Anger, your punter. It's tough. Generally, I think it's pretty safe to say that when you're talking about special teams unit, kicker, punter, long snapper, when you're talking about that battery, so to speak, teams generally, when they find ones they like to keep everybody in place. They don't like a lot of year over year turnover there. And they like to have a commitment to that. I mean, think about how long it was LP Ladouceur, Chris Jones, and Dan Bailey, for instance. And so Bryan Anger has obviously been a Pro Bowler here and has been a good punter for them and a difference maker at times, honestly, in terms of field position. So I would think that they would want him back. The only complicating factor here, obviously, is Bones Fossil is no longer here. You have a new special teams coach and guys who maybe have different ideas about things. And maybe Bryan Anger says, I'd rather go somewhere else where I can work with this coach now or work with this person or this individual. And so that one's a little murky right now. But I'm leaning towards that ultimately Bryan Anger's going to be back. In fact, we'll just lump in here your long snapper, Trent Sieg, as well. Trent is another one who, free agent, has been here the last 2 years and has formed a tight group there with Brandon Aubrey and Bryan Anger. But I think that, again, that one's just a little uncertain right now as to what his side wants to do and what the Cowboys want to do. And how much the complicating factor may exist of new special teams coach who wants his own guys, or maybe that special teams coach that they worked with here, who's now in another market in another city there in Tennessee with the Titans. Maybe he's offering up something that says, hey, let's keep working together over here. And that may be a tempting option there. So I think both of those right now are unsettled. I don't think there's a great beat on what exactly is going to happen there. But ultimately, I would say I would lean a little bit towards that you're going to have those guys back. Next on the list, Eric Kendricks, somebody who I think was really admirable in the leadership that he showed and the way that he approached things here in Dallas, and was a really stable veteran to have in the locker room in a year where things weren't going great. We know at the time that he came to Dallas after rejecting more money in San Francisco because he thought he'd have better opportunity here in Dallas. Obviously, Mike Zimmer was here. I think that pairing gets oversold a little bit sometimes. I don't know that things were all hunky-dory for those two when they came back together, because I think Kendricks was one of the guys who had said some things after Mike Zimmer's departure that I don't know that Zim took well. But I think ultimately they worked through those things, had discussions about it. But early on, I think there was a little bit of awkwardness during the offseason program. But ultimately, I thought he played well. He's not the same player. Again, same discussion we had with Brandin Cooks. He's not the same player that he once was. But Eric Kendricks, I think, is still a serviceable player and somebody who will, I ain't as good as I once was, but I'm as good once as I've ever been, or whatever the phrase is. I think that Kendricks embodies that, where he'll have games where you go, wow, there he is. That's him. That's the Eric Kendricks we know. And then there are other times where you look at it and go, he just doesn't have the speed to get to the corner anymore. He's not got the best. He doesn't take the best angles anymore. He feels like he's a little bit vulnerable to cutbacks. Coverage isn't always there. So it's just inconsistent. And that's something that I think was frustrating for the Cowboys at times. Even though they liked a great deal of what Eric Kendricks brought to the table, I think the inconsistency was a little bit frustrating. And I think it was frustrating for Eric Kendricks too. But I think ultimately Eric Kendricks probably moves on down the road, and this will live in this will have a section in Cowboys history similar to that of Zach Thomas when he came to Dallas in 2008 for just a brief period. So similar, I would think that Eric Kendricks is probably going to be somewhere else next year. Next on this list, and this one is really difficult to nail down right now, and that's Jordan Lewis. So Jordan Lewis, the guy that I've compared him to in the last year or so, he's this generation's Dat Win. Like, you're just talking about the undersized, gritty, tough, smart competitor who has gotten every last bit of maximizing his ability. He's gotten every bit of talent out of his body. And I think that they're in a weird spot right now in terms of negotiating or trying to work something out. I think that after Oso Odigizua, Jordan Lewis was number 2 for the Cowboys as the priority. He's their nickel guy and a guy that they think very highly of as a leader, as a the mental makeup of the player, the things that he can do for them and how difficult that would be to replace. And in general, I think just the physicality and the toughness that he's willing to show, and showing that physicality and toughness is very important, especially in the run game for Matt Eberflus. Matt Eberflus wants physical guys in the secondary who are willing to make plays in the run. I hope you're listening, Trayvon Diggs, because that'll be something that they're going to, in all likelihood, have an eye on you for when you return, is that they're going to want that physicality to be consistent. And so I think that for Jordan Lewis, they absolutely want him back. It's to what extent are they comfortable paying what it'll take? Is this going to be a situation where they're willing to say, we'll give you $4 million and the market is saying we'll give you $7 million? Can you walk away from that? Can you, in good conscience, no matter how much you love being a Cowboy and how much time you've put in here, and Jordan Lewis has put in a lot of hours here and done a lot of really important work as a leader to stabilize some unstable moments throughout his time here in Dallas. So I think that they recognize how much he means to them on the field and in the locker room, and they want him back, but there's a limit to that. And I think that limit financially is different than what Jordan Lewis and his side sees. So at this point, the question would just be, they can prioritize it all they want. Jordan Lewis can come back here all he wants, but ultimately, is that gap, are you going to be able to close that gap the same way you did with Osa Odigizua? And I don't know right now if they're going to be able to do that. I think that if Jordan Lewis comes back, he is going to be leaving money on the table to do so. And I think if Jordan Lewis comes back, the Cowboys are probably going to end up paying more than they wanted to, just like the Osa situation. But right now, I'm leaning towards he's going to be back. I think that there's some tension there right now on the negotiation side, but I think that ultimately this is going to be a situation where the Cowboys will realize we got to have him here, and we can't let him walk out the door. And ultimately they'll probably go above what they were wanting to, while still probably not meeting the market, but enough so that Jordan Lewis feels appreciated and wants to return. All right, let's run through the rest of this list here really quickly. Linval Joseph, their defensive tackle, who was a Mike Zimmer guy. That's, again, somebody that I would not anticipate returning in 2025, mainly because of what they want, what Aaron Whitecotton, the defensive line coach, and what Matt Eberflus, the defensive coordinator, want the defensive front to do and play that attack style. And I don't think that Linval Joseph is going to be somebody that is a scheme fit necessarily for them. Now, Matt Eberflus, when he spoke to the Dallas media, had said recently that the area of his coaching that has evolved the most since he was here in Dallas was recognizing the need to fit players to your scheme rather than your scheme, or fit your scheme to your players rather than your players to your scheme. That too often willing to walk away from a good football player because they weren't a scheme fit. That was something that Eberflus said that he had evolved on a little bit and realized I've got to be able to get the most out of these guys. And if they don't fit my scheme exactly, then I need to change something about my scheme probably. But even with that said, there are just some limitations in terms of what that means with a scheme. And Linval Joseph is a run stopping nose tackle, and that's just not a big part of what the Cowboys are going to be doing on defense next year. In terms of what the makeup of their defense is going to look like. So I think that Linval Joseph is out. Cooper Rush, we mentioned the discussion that Stephen Jones had about Trey Lance. A lot of that applies also to Cooper Rush. And I think that Cooper Rush is going to be looking for more opportunity. So Cooper Rush is out in 2025. Chuma Edoga, that one, Edoga is going to be looking to the market. So I think the Cowboys have decided that they're good moving on there. And I think that Edoga similarly wants to explore some other options. So Chuma Edoga is not going to be back in 2025, I believe, not from the things that I've heard and the discussions that I've had. Chauncey Golston is going to get a bigger payday than I think some people anticipate. And so I would not be surprised to see Golston gets something Monday or Tuesday that causes Cowboys fans to kind of, take a step back and just, whoa, are you serious? And he's a good player. And there's a lot of DeMarcus Lawrence-like traits there. It's kind of like a DeMarcus Lawrence starter kit in a little bit of a way. But ultimately, I think that Golston is just going to be priced way out of what Dallas is going to be able to afford and what they would want to pay. So I think that number is going to come in and some people are going to say, yeah, I'm comfortable with Golston going somewhere else. Nick Vigil, the linebacker, who again was a Mike Zimmer guy. I think that Vigil will be looking for different opportunities. They'll try to figure out some other setup for themselves at linebacker, find a special teamer and a veteran guy. Israel Mukuamu, who I think was frustrated at times with the opportunities he was given during his time here in Dallas, and maybe rightfully so, because when he was out there on the field, he played pretty well overall, I think, given expectations. And was a flexible guy who could play safety. He did some stuff in the nickel at times. He could play outside. He was a guy who had a lot of confidence and believed he could have been a full-time corner. And the Cowboys drafted him as a corner out of South Carolina, moved him to safety, and he, kind of played a flexible role, not given many opportunities the first couple of years. And then the last 2 years, got a little bit of an uptick in some opportunities due to injuries and other things. But I think that he always wanted more, and I think that he'll be looking for that elsewhere. Carlos Watkins was a guy that stepped in and played pretty well at times for the Cowboys last year after they snatched him up when they were having real problems with their defensive line depth. I think that Watkins could be a guy that they're willing to look at, and the flexibility that he can provide a little bit. So Carlos Watkins right now, I'm going to say that I'm going to lean towards he is back in 2025. I do think that the Cowboys could envision a role for him. Not a big primary role, but as a depth piece, I think that's somebody that they would have some interest in bringing back if it's for the right price, as a lot of these are. Carl Lawson is a guy that I think they absolutely believe can still contribute for them in some form or fashion, and did a good job last year. So it's just going to come down to what is the market willing to pay. I'm anticipating that he's going to get a little bit more on the market and will ultimately end up somewhere else in 2025. But if there's a little bit of a tepid, climate out there for him, and teams aren't willing to bank on the injury issues and the injury history and some of the up and down play that he's had, then I think it's very easy to see Carl Lawson coming back here. But I think Carl Lawson probably goes out there, explores his options, and then if it's not what he wants or not what he likes, then returns to Dallas in 2025. So, and then the last guy that we got to talk about, and it's the biggest one probably left on this list, and that's Rico Dowdle. Dowdle, you're starting to hear some chatter, people making reference to the fact that Dowdle could be a guy that they want to pair a running back with in 2025. I know Dan Graziano at ESPN had suggested that the Cowboys are looking for a running back to pair with him. That's their thought process, and that would seem to indicate a guy that they believe is going to return. I think that there's a shot he comes back, but it's not going to be. It's only going to be if the market doesn't pay him what they think he's worth. Because right now, I think Rico Dowdle's side believes that he can command $6 million a year on the open market. And I think the Cowboys are nowhere near that. So if the Cowboys are willing to say, we'll go 3, we'll give you about half of that. I just don't anticipate that Dowdle is going to find something, or going to go out there and find that the Cowboys deal is the highest one that he has. And I think that they feel like Dowdle and his representation feel like they're going to be able to go out there, and if they can't find 6, they'll be able to find 2 for 10 with it fully guaranteed or something along those lines. He's a good player. He is a really good player. He's a really good running back. The biggest thing with him was always just staying healthy. And given the physical running style, it's not easy to stay healthy. And so I think that if he goes out there and teams are scared off a little bit by the running style and believe that, man, you're not going to be able to stay healthy long enough for us to be able to bank on this, then at that point, he might find that the market has cooled enough that he would return. But this one, I'm saying Rico Dowdle not back in 2025, just because I think what he wants and what somebody out there is going to be willing to pay him when they look at what he did in the second half of the season with an offensive line that was not always playing at the top of its game, I think that's going to be intriguing to somebody, and somebody's going to be willing to say, yeah, I'll pay $6 million on an ever expanding salary cap. Sure. That guy is worth it. That guy gives us some juice. He's somebody that we can get something out of, and somebody that we believe we can really build our running game around, or at least complement it with. And so $5-6 million, sure, we can go that route. So my anticipation is that Dowdle ultimately gets signed somewhere else for somewhere in the range of 3 for 18 with like 12 million guaranteed or something along those lines. 3 for 18, 10, 11 guaranteed, something like that. And that'll just be more than the Cowboys would want to dive in with and handle and commit to. So ultimately, I think what we're looking at here is you return your punter and your long snapper. You've got your battery there with Anger and Sieg. And then I think that ultimately they'll figure it out with Jordan Lewis as their nickelback returning to the team. I think that Carlos Watkins has an opportunity to. Carl Lawson has an opportunity to. It's just a matter of, are they able to mesh what the market maybe has out there for them? A cooler market in all likelihood for a guy like Carlos Watkins. I think as long as they're both agreeable on what that figure looks like and on probably a 1-year deal, I think Watkins very well could be back because there's a fit that I think they see for him. But otherwise, you're saying goodbye to just about everybody else. And it's going to be another year of a lot of turnover with your depth. And a new coaching staff that has different ideas about what these players need to look like. All right. So in terms of free agency and looking ahead, Cowboys, like I said, they're going to have to take care of their own first, but as they get into the week, don't expect a bunch of big time shopping. I wouldn't be surprised if eventually they get in on, at some level, the Cooper Kupp discussions. And in a lot of these instances, just look for the connections to the coaching tree. And you're going to start finding guys that make sense who are free agents. So whether that's Javon Kinlaw, who has a history with Aaron Whitecotton and is somebody who in all likelihood would be able to fit with the schemes that Matt Eberflus and Aaron Whitecotton want to run here in Dallas. You've got another option, the Colts edge rusher who came out of Vanderbilt a couple years ago, Dayo Odingbo. Yeah, say that 3 times fast. He's going to be a guy who is free and somebody that Eberflus had previously invested in Indianapolis and could be somebody that could, as long as he's healthy, contribute for the Cowboys consistently. So not that those are guys that they're floating or anything else. It's just those are the kind of connections that you look to make when you're trying to anticipate how deep into free agency are the Cowboys willing to go. But again, it all starts with figuring out what they want to do with their own. I think it's going to be very limited, very few players that are back from this current free agent group. And at that point, the Cowboys will be faced with a similar question they had last year. How much are they willing to go get that depth back on the free agent market? And how much are they willing to potentially move around in the draft to pick up extra capital and throw it at rebuilding that depth? Because that's what destroyed them last year. They had their problems even when they were healthy, but as things progressed, they just didn't have bodies at some point. And it had become a big issue for them. So replacing that depth, making sure you're not letting a Dante Fowler walk to go then pick up double-digit sacks in Washington, or letting a guy go like Jonathan Hankins, who's going to play the run well in Seattle. Just make sure that you're not walking away from those players just out of a little discomfort for financially what it looks like. And I think that's something that the Cowboys are going to have to come to grips with. All right, we'll have more for you as free agency wears on. Until next time, thanks so much for joining us. Talk to you later.